안녕하세요.
In the days following the meeting room incident, the atmosphere at Kang Enterprises had shifted. Yoon Hae-jin still felt the weight of people's gazes, but something had changed. Now, many looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect. No one had ever seen Kang Joon-ho intervene for an employee like that before. She tried to ignore the murmurs, focusing on her work. But an unsettling truth settled within her. Why had he helped her? Joon-ho was not known for getting involved in minor company affairs. He was cold, impassive, and showed no interest in anyone. He probably just didn't want the company to suffer from an unfair mistake, she murmured to herself, trying to convince herself. However, her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when her colleague, Min Ji-eun, approached with a mischievous look. Hae-jin, care to explain why the CEO looked at you as if he wanted to protect a defenseless princess? Hae-jin nearly choked on her coffee. What? That's nonsense. He only stepped in because he saw the situation was unfair. It doesn't mean anything. Ji-eun arched an eyebrow, unconvinced. We'll see. On the upper floor, Joon-ho was just as restless. Since that day, he had realized that his concern for Hae-jin went beyond business logic. He had spent years building an impeccable reputation, keeping himself distant from any emotional involvement. But Hae-jin was different. He knew he needed to keep his distance. However, fate didn't seem willing to cooperate. That afternoon, a charity event organized by the administrative board required the presence of several employees, including the CEO himself. To his surprise, Hae-jin was assigned to assist with guest reception. When he arrived at the luxurious event hall, he spotted her immediately. Hae-jin wore an elegant black dress, a stark contrast to her usual business attire. Her hair was tied back in a simple yet sophisticated style. He felt something unfamiliar in his chest, a warmth he couldn't define. Without realizing it, his steps carried him toward her. Yoon Hae-jin. His voice was lower than usual. She turned, surprised. She had never expected him to approach her at an event like this. President Kang, I didn't know you had arrived. He observed her for a moment before responding. Are you okay? Hae-jin blinked a few times, confused. Yes, why wouldn't I be? He pressed his lips together, hesitant. Before he could reply, a female voice interrupted. Oppa, you took so long. Seo Mira, the daughter of one of Kang Enterprises' largest investors, approached, linking her arm with Joon-ho's as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and clearly harbored a romantic interest in the CEO. Hae-jin felt a strange discomfort growing inside her. And who are you? Mira asked, scanning Hae-jin from head to toe. Yoon Hae-jin. I work in the administrative department. Mira smiled, but her eyes gleamed with superiority. Oh, how cute. You must be working so hard. Joon-ho frowned. Mira, was that tone necessary? She blinked innocently. What tone, Oppa? I'm just being friendly. Hae-jin felt her face heat up. She knew disguised contempt when she saw it. Excuse me, I need to get back to work, she said, bowing slightly before walking away. Joon-ho watched her leave, a growing discomfort gnawing at him. Mira noticed his expression and let out a quiet laugh. Don't tell me you're interested in her, Oppa. That would be such a shame. People like her could never understand the world we live in. Joon-ho's eyes darkened. That night, sitting in his car, he picked up his phone and typed a message before he could stop himself. Joon-ho, are you okay? The seconds felt like an eternity until Hae-jin finally responded. Hae-jin, yes, why? He hesitated before replying. Joon-ho, I just wanted to make sure. And at that moment, he realized no matter how hard he tried to stay away, he had already crossed the line between duty and the heart. The days following the charity event were a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions for Kang Joon-ho. He had never allowed himself to feel anything beyond duty and responsibility. But now, every time he closed his eyes, he saw Yoon Hae-jin. The way she averted her gaze when nervous, how her lips trembled when she tried to hold back a sharp response, her resilience in the face of adversity. At the company, the rumors continued to spread. Hi, Jin's name was whispered in the hallways, and the stares directed at her became sharper. Everyone wanted to know what was going on between her and the CEO. Hai Jin, on the other hand, did everything she could to avoid Junho. Since the message he had sent that night, a new barrier had formed between them. She didn't want to delude herself. She knew that people like him and people like her lived in different worlds. And yet, why did her heart race every time their paths crossed? That afternoon, as she was leaving the company, she noticed a man in a suit waiting by the entrance. He was tall, imposing, and his gaze carried an unmistakable authority. A chill ran down Hyejin's spine when she realized he was heading straight for her. "Miss Yoon Hyejin?" His voice was firm, almost military. "Yes, that's me. Who are you?" He handed her a business card. "Kang Do-hyun, chairman of the Kang Group." Hyejin held her breath. "Jun, Ho's father, I would like to have a word with you. In private." His words were not a request, they were a command. With cold hands, she nodded. The chairman's driver took her to an upscale restaurant, where a reserved table awaited them. The man sat across from her, his piercing gaze analyzing her every move. "Do you know why you're here?" Hyejin straightened, trying to maintain her composure. "I assume it has to do with your son." Do-hyun let out a dry chuckle. "You're smart. That's good. But you also need to be realistic. People like you don't belong in his world." Hyejin felt her face burn with anger but forced herself to stay calm. "With all due respect, Chairman Kang, I never intended to get involved with your son." He stared at her for a moment before sliding an envelope across the table. Hyejin looked at it but didn't touch it. "Inside are documents that will ensure you have a comfortable future, enough to leave the company and start over somewhere else. Far away from my son." Her breath caught. It was a bribe. Slowly, Hyejin pushed the envelope back toward him. "I don't need your money. If you want me out of the company, fire me. Otherwise, I'll keep working because I fought for this job." "Do." Hyun's eyes narrowed. "I see why Junho is interested in you. But I'll warn you only once, Miss Yoon. My son does not have the luxury of freely choosing who can be by his side. He has a duty. And you are an obstacle to that." Hyejin felt a tightness in her chest, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Father." They both turned at the same time. Kang Junho stood there, his eyes locked onto the envelope on the table. Silence weighed between them before Do-hyun rose to his feet. "I hope you have more sense than this girl, Junho. Don't throw away everything we've built." Without another word, he left. Hyejin remained seated, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Junho approached and sat across from her. "He offered you money, didn't he?" She didn't answer, but the untouched envelope on the table spoke for itself. He let out a weary sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, Hyejin." She lifted her gaze to him. "It's not you who should be apologizing." Junho held her gaze for a long moment, as if making a silent decision. Then, he picked up the envelope, opened it, and tore the documents in half. Hyejin held her breath. He looked at her, his expression resolute. "I'm not giving up on you." And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them. Kang Jun, Ho's words hung in the air, carrying a promise that made Yoon Hyejin's heart race. "I'm not giving up on you." Never before had she felt such intensity in a gaze. Yet, his father's words and the weight of societal expectations still loomed over them like a shadow. The next day, Junho called an urgent meeting with the shareholders. He knew he had to take control of the narrative before his father intervened again. As he stepped into the conference room, all eyes turned to him. At the head of the table sat his father, Kang Do-hyun, his expression cold and calculating. "I appreciate everyone's presence. I have an important announcement to make." "Jun," Ho's voice rang firm through the room. The whispers died down. Do-hyun narrowed his eyes. "I am aware of the rumors surrounding my personal life. So, let me make something clear. My private life is my responsibility, and my ability to lead this company is not tied to who I choose to love. The shareholders exchanged surprised glances at his direct statement. Do-hyun, however, remained unmoved. Are you saying you intend to put an employee above the company's interests, Junho? His voice was sharp. Junho met his father's gaze without hesitation. I'm saying that the success of Kang Group should never depend on an outdated tradition. This company became great because we embraced innovation and evolution. I will not let an archaic notion of status stand in the way of my happiness. Silence filled the room. The shareholders didn't know how to react. Some seemed to agree, while others were clearly uncomfortable. But Junho knew he had planted the seed of change. That night, Hae-jin waited anxiously for news. Her worry grew with each passing minute. When Junho finally appeared at the entrance of her small apartment, she noticed the tension in his shoulders. "How did it go?" she asked, almost breathless. He smiled a tired but genuine smile. "It was difficult, but necessary. My father won't give up easily, but he knows now that neither will I." Hae-jin lowered her gaze. "Are you sure it's worth it? I don't want to be a burden to you." Before she could finish her sentence, Junho took her hands in his. "Don't say that. You're not a burden, Hae-jin. You are the reason I want to fight." Tears welled up in her eyes, but before she could say anything, Junho pulled her into a deep, sincere kiss. For the first time, there were no doubts, no fears, only the love that surrounded them completely. Months passed, bringing both challenges and victories. Do-hyun, realizing he could not control his son, reluctantly accepted the relationship. The shareholders, seeing that the company continued to thrive under Junho's leadership, stopped questioning his personal choices. And 1 year later, in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by friends and family, Kang Junho and Yoon Hae-jin exchanged vows of eternal love. Beneath the starry sky of Seoul, they promised each other that they would never let anything or anyone tear them apart. When Hae-jin stepped into the home they now shared, she felt the warmth of the family she had always dreamed of. And as Junho wrapped his arms around her, whispering that she would always be the love of his life, she knew they had won. Their love had overcome everything.